Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are at. Hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and we finally had a couple days now. I want to say since the time of the recording, which is on Monday, we have had at least like maybe 2 or 3 days to explore and navigate through Chimera. Now, Chimera has been a very interesting experience for a lot of us, and I'm actually going to go ahead and screenshot my particular run on Ultra Nightmare just so you guys can kind of see it. And we're going to refer to that for information moving forward going into what I would say is going to be a pretty interesting thing. But what I wanted to talk about in particular when it comes to this mode is basically what would be some good guidance, some good reference points for people to be able to explore and enjoy the experience for each of the forms or just the content in general. So with that being said, I have at least one tip for each Chimera form that you guys can enjoy today, as well as one bonus tip that will hopefully help you guys out. Now, before I begin, I want to let you guys know that all your love and support has been very much appreciated. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you guys have been experiencing in Chimera yourself, okay? So, tip number one. Number one is going to be in the ultimate form. You're going to start off with it, and you're going to have him laced throughout the fight. Now, one thing that I will say about my experiences when starting off is that, like, the ultimate form has been pretty easy to deal with. All you have to worry about is basically whenever you're transitioning from other forms going back into it, he does a little bit of a burst damage, and if you've been doing trials, his damage scales up a little bit. So, basically, the main thing is uptime is important. Remove the ability for the boss to put increased speed for himself. That's probably going to be my biggest tip that I'll give you guys. So if you're not familiar with the boss, basically in his second form, you'll see that he likes to do increased speed on himself. So I'm going to actually pull up the infographic regarding that. And basically, at this point, after he does his consume matter, he removes all buffs from all enemies and tries to inflict damage based off of each one that's been removed. That's the big burst you got to watch out for initially. But if you're running like things like protection or champions like maybe a Latrion, you ain't got to worry about that. In this particular form, though, he also has the opportunity to provide increased speed with his Pincer Lash. Now, when I say uptime is important is you want to basically get as much time as possible in this form because it's very easy to get a lot of damage out. And that's probably one of the biggest things you're looking for in this content is not only doing trials, but to get a good burst of damage out, right? So, the boss getting increased speed only means that his turn meter is going to be gradually increasing to a point where he's going to get to his turn sooner. So, by preventing that, you have a lot more opportunity for uptime. So, he puts it on himself for 2 turns. The one way you can deter that is by putting up block buffs on the enemy or having a strip champion in there to negate it. So, some key champions that would be pretty valuable for this that we've been seeing a lot of exploration on could be, on the free-to-play side, we have Lydia, who not only is useful in other areas for debuffing and whatnot, or in particular against this boss, has a lot of really good valuable debuffs, but also comes with block buff on that A3, which can be very, very useful. Additionally, we've seen some damage output associated champions like our goat or our pony in arms, Senor Marius. So Marius has the ability to do debuff or buff duration decreases. Basically, although it goes on him, he follows up with his A2, which allows him to reduce the turn meter or the duration of that buff, eventually allowing the buff to go away because of that, right? So it's kind of like a buff strip in a sense. So those type of involvements or champions that use that could be very, very valuable for you if you're interested in experiencing a high amount of uptime on the ultimate form itself. Now, with that being said, we go into our next form, which is going to be the Ram form. Tip number 2, dual tanks. And I feel like this is something that is a little underrated. Using affinity as well as builds to improve your duel experience. So, whenever the Ram form goes into his next... basically, the Chimera goes into his next form, which will be Ram, you'll have a period where he puts a duel on somebody in particular. And it happens at the beginning of the round. So... he does it on the enemy. Duel particularly is placed on the champion that I believe that has the least amount of crit damage. So you can make your builds associated to your champions in line with preventing it or forcing it to go on a particular champion. So I in particular, when I was doing my run, I don't know if you saw it, I used, I believe it was Androck in this particular team, and he has a lot of value that he brings to the table. But one of the things I really liked about it is, one, he's a defensive champion, so he already has a survival stat that you're invested into, which is defense, and you maybe you can inflate a little bit of the HP, but also in particular, he has affinity. Right now, this current affinity for Chimera is Force, so Force going against Spirit makes it a lot more tankier. He has a lot more high of a chance to weak hit, which can basically stop the duel, where he's constantly repeating that attack. Now, if you saw what it said there on that he would keep continuously doing it if he the Maiming Stampede, which is the hit that really kind of kills your your dual tank, for lack of better words, if they do more than 20% of the damage. You know, basically, if he hits you for 20%, he's going to do it again and again and again until eventually you're dead, right? But with tanking that with a affinity tank that allows you to introduce not only reduced critical damage, reduce basically all the things that you get with affinity, it allows you to stop that in its tracks and allow basically the team to kind of continue moving forward without losing anybody, which is very, very important in this particular fight. You don't want people to die, ideally, because there's a lot of punishment that can go from it along the way. And if you lose one champion that is supposed to be your dual tank, the next one up could be that very, very integral support champion like your Elva, or basically you're sustaining that fight that can keep you going. And it's very, very rough. Also, side note, Ram form sucks the most because deflect damage OP. Anyways, with that being said, Lion form, number 3. We have a lot of things that kind of come out of it. From my experience overall, I want to say the Lion form was probably the most easiest. And with that being said, I feel like this is probably one of the best times to get the most amount of damage. So this is what I consider our time to slam period. One tip I will give you is basically keeping block debuffs up across the board for the entire fight, but more importantly, particularly here, because he does like to put some debuffs like True Fear and whatnot on his A1, which can be very annoying. Also, with Hunter's Gaze that gets put on every single time you cleanse it or remove it, it is he repeats his Annihilation Claw. It's part of his passive here whenever that happens. But I will say that you can kind of mitigate that as long as you have block debuffs up, as well as you know, kind of removing it from the fight for a little bit. He has to replace it back on at the beginning of the turn, but more importantly, it's more so just for like the True Fears and the debuffs that can be placed on people, which allows you to just remove that from the fight itself. Hunter's Gaze cannot be resisted or blocked, so it's kind of like that still goes through, but no matter what, you're avoiding all the other debuffs, which can be very problematic for uptime and keeping your team alive. So this one, less so much of an issue, more so get in there, go ham, go home kind of deal. Now, with that being said, Viper form, which is probably the most underestimated, I would say, or not even underestimated, but more so problematic if you're not careful, is the most dangerous one, believe it or not, especially if you're not prepared for it. So my big tip, which is tip number 4, prepare for buff steal. You could do this in a lot of different ways, and I'm just going to go ahead and throw some examples at you. One is going into Viper form, maybe hold back on doing too much of your buffs/debuffs, basically allow your cooldowns to kind of get back off from the ultimate form transitioning. So, you know, he changes every 5 boss turn counts. On that 4th or 5th leading up to the Viper form change, you can basically slow down the fight a little bit for yourself to allow your buffs to fall off, and maybe change up a little bit of your debuffs, so allow your cooldowns to be available, so when you go into the form, you can react to it. Now, you can also prepare for it by doing protection sets. We obviously know that they're very valuable here, but more importantly, the way you build too is also important too. Now, we do know that the boss has a lot of accuracy and a lot of resistance that we have to keep in mind, but you can do things to kind of help enable the efficiency on both sides of that, whether that's increased resistance or decreased resistance, or just resistance itself. Maybe consider taking some of your champions and putting them in higher stat values that are aligned with higher resistance. That could help out just a teeny bit, instead of, you know, worrying about your buffs maybe not being fully protected from 9-piece. You know, it's a chance rate for each one of them. You now just out tank it, you know what I mean? Like he can't take it from you because you just resisted, right? Or additionally, you could do things like block buff. We used Lydia as a great example in one of the other forms in terms of being able to provide block buffs. It's still valuable here, but more importantly, she also brings to the table something that the boss is subjected to if you pay attention to his information. It says only block passes compared to all the other bosses. Block actives is not something that he's immune to. So Lydia's A3 provides 2 in 1. Not only are you block buffing, but you're also providing block actives. Now, she's not the only champion that can do this, but I'm just using her as an example in here. Find answers to that, whether you're going to go down the block buff route, so you're still getting buffs stolen from you, but because he has block buffs on him, you don't have to worry about that. Now, that first official time when he transitions in, you really kind of can't stop it, because he goes into Viper form and then does the ability that does the strip. So maybe being a little bit more preemptive, like I said earlier, could be very valuable. But in the offset that you are able to have fully protected buffs, but you're worried about it down the road, having that block buff up or that block active skills can prevent him from doing the ability or getting value out of that ability. So take that to note. Now, with that being said, I think this is a great opportunity to talk about some extra additional things. I'm going to give you guys a little +1, maybe some more on top of that compared to what I've already done. I feel like survivability is very, very important. As long as you're able to maintain some form of sustain, then you're going to do good. And that's a bar, just so you guys are aware. But with sustain being the name of the game, your support champions, outside of maybe some small exceptions, which we all know that she in particular is really, really busted. We get it. You have your place to shine. But with that being said, there are some champions that they're not exactly like Senna, or they are, they're decent and they do the job. I in particular, I used Elva from my experience. But they're not always going to be able to maintain that that level of support because they're doing other things. You're cleansing, putting block debuffs, maybe even reviving for a turn because something happened. During that period, though, the rest of your team still has to survive, or else you're going to have more deaths, which could be a cascading effect of an issue, especially with Viper form, with like necrosis and all these other issues that could pop up from just raw damage, right? Raw damage intake. So, sustain. I, in particular, use what I believe is going to be one of the strongest champions in this particular mode, which is Toshiro. I know it's a mythic. I know it's OP. But you can find other examples, and I'll give you one. It's Leech. Toshiro, in particular, has Leech in his kit, along with some other things that allow you to have a higher uptime and damage, which is like decreased defense and whatnot. But Leech, in particular, is the thing I'm going to give you guys as a bonus. Leech is so underrated in this particular environment because while your support is taking care of some of the fundamentals and the important stuff that you need for your team, the damage you put out can technically be netted for extra survivability. There's been plenty of times where my boys take a little bit more of a hit than usual, or maybe we didn't have enough continuous heals out in play, but because I got that leech out, I go in for a hit, and that allows me to just stay alive, and that gives me enough breathing room to make sure that I get to the next transition, the next phase, or the next opportunity for damage, and I stabilize. Next thing you know, I'm doing high amounts of damage. Now, with that being said, I do know and acknowledge that my team isn't number one or anything like that particularly, but being able to do top chest and hit it on Ultra Nightmare is the starting point that I wanted to hit with mine. So I'll use my team as an example. When it came to what I was looking for, I wanted to give as much uptime as possible. Androck kind of helped complemented that. Mikage kind of complemented that. And then I wanted to enable my damage dealers and keep my damage dealers going with whatever support means I had available, whether that was Androck or Elva. So like Androck is like a 2-for-1 because all mythics are like 2 champions in one. Androck gave me like a lot of value in not only debuff opportunities, those block buffs I was telling you about, that decreased resistance I was talking about, but also gave me the opportunity to scale faster in the fight with his passive and his base form. And I was looking to improve that experience ever so slightly so that it wasn't so heavily dependent upon my Elva doing the trick. So Androck complemented her while enabling the team to go more aggressively into the fight. And then Toshiro, in the event that we had a circumstance where one of those champions are dropped off, I had Androck as my enfeeble tank. Sometimes he got rocked, sometimes he lived, and he was able to keep the team going. But like during those periods where any hiccup can occur, it's nice to have a backup outlet, which Toshiro was, Androck was, and then Elva being the primary support for this team let me go through, and that's pretty much how I encourage that experience for you guys, and that's where my tips kind of come from. So with that being said, is there any other feedback you can give? Oh, in terms of Leech, I haven't had the chance to experiment with him yet, but I think he would be a really, really great champion. Has a great aura to help you go faster. But Necmo, man, that increased speed into the decreased speed Leech. Decreased speed also being very good. Remember, we want uptime, especially on the ultimate form, but also other forms as well. Maybe not so much Ram. I think you kind of want to let Ram come and go really, really quickly because it's a battle of just staying alive while you don't kill yourself, really. And that kind of sucks a little bit, but it is possible. It just means that you have to just slow down the output. You maybe can't go as aggressively as you want to. And there's got to be a way that we could kind of find some more stronger capability. Maybe I'm thinking like shields could be the complementary aspect of it. And that's something I've been kind of like thinking about. Maybe that could give us like an example of something to like, we could still go aggressive, but without too much drawback. But Leech also kind of helps out a little bit with that too as well. Maybe instead of one-tapping yourself, you hurt yourself, but you kind of live through it a little bit, I don't know. There's some things that's been kind of hit or miss when it comes to the experience. But I think the best thing that I would say is that like decreased speed and Leech are very, very valued debuffs in this particular mode. So I guess tip number 6 at this point, I've done lost track. But basically what I've gotten at is learn the survivability aspect of it. Once you're at that point, you can start injecting more and more opportunities to uptime to create uptime for your damage output. And I think that's where you're going to start finding a sweet spot. And as we improve our builds and as we improve the dynamic of going against this boss, you'll start noticing that we'll start weaning back or reeling ourselves away from so much dependencies on supports into more damage output. So that's going to be something we're going to have to keep our eyes out on. I'll just give you guys a little tidbit of a little bit of like a funny moment here. My Androck is not booked at all, and I still had such a positive experience with it. So I thought that was really cool. For someone who a lot of people don't view as like a very strong support, he's actually kind of surprised me in the value that he's brought to the table. Now, with that being said, some alternatives for him would be basically champions that can help keep your team going, boosting, and still providing a lot of debuff value or buff value, depending on which side you want to lean on for him. And I think that's kind of what you're looking for. Like, for example, even in some of the more speed zoomy teams right now with the Energizer teams and stuff, they don't go the full turn count limit just yet. They get pretty close, though, I won't lie. So you have like a lot of room where like these extra turns aren't really an issue. Maybe Relentless could be an example. Although I will say that like protection is very strong right now in this particular meta. And then maybe there could be some opportunities for like Feral or you know, there's a lot of experimenting we still have to do, but I thought I would give you something that I started off with in terms of like little tips that helped me along the way to get me at least to the starting point, which was top chest. Now from there, it's going to be optimizing with trials in mind, and honestly, some of the champions that we talked about, like Androck, for example, are stupidly strong, man. Like, getting that increased defense for one particular buggy trial, or maybe landing a certain amount of debuffs, which he has no problems doing. I mean, he brings at least like 3 or 4 to the table that are applicable. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, at least 4. Maybe you get 5, 6, and 7 from somewhere else, depending on the difficulty you're using, and then you have it. And then on top of that too, the sustain that he brings, I mean, this guy was like super strong for me. I will say that another shining star that's surprising enough, enemy max HP is okay. So I guess tip number 7 at this point. We're getting up to 10 tips at this point. But like enemy max HP still holds up pretty well. I use Marius, I use Gina. I actually felt like Gina kind of gave me a little bit more value in terms of like for the team overall, more so than just his raw damage output, because he brings decreased attack and more importantly weaken. So although my Androck is pretty solid for providing that weaken too as well, I have to flip forms for him. And to be honest with you, for more boosting and more uptime on my team as a whole, I would prefer to keep him in his base form. So like having that Gina to allow me to get a little bit more, you know, uptime in that weekend for more damage output was pretty nice. And to be honest with you, the counterattack is really synchronous, like synchronous. It has a really good like synergy with Androck, because Androck in his base form, whenever someone crit hits, he has an opportunity to get, or it gives everybody turn meter, right? So you benefit from doing your turns, but then you also benefit from the boss hitting you because you counterattack. Now it's also a detriment too, because Viper has stolen my counterattack a couple times, and that's rough. That's all I'm gonna say. I mean, super really exciting. And I have to say this, I don't know about you guys, but my overall thoughts about Chimera so far is that it's very early. We still have like a lot of experimenting to do, but my experience so far is that I don't feel like I'm being oppressed in doing good damage output. I don't feel like I'm being oppressed if I go down the trial route. It's like there's a spot for everyone depending on the style you want to do. Maybe you have the champion pool, but not the gear to really pump out a lot of damage, so you instead focus on trials and you still net a lot of value out of that. Or you can go down the damage route and just let it rip and play to the style, like play for the max of the big damage, you know, all that good stuff. Like you could do it that way too if you want to, and you have something in there, or you go in a little bit in between. Like it's good all around, and I think that's a very positive experience for the player base. I will say Chimera to me so far is a W. The only issue, and if I had a very small complaint, and it's only because we haven't found an optimized way around it, is just RAM. RAM stops me from going ham, so I have to kind of hold back a little bit, and I slow it down a little bit, you know. But it's a small potato of more so just like knowing when to be patient and knowing when to like bide your time and how to work around that. And then netting as much damage in response to that, like how to pace yourself and then basically keep yourself stable while you're transitioning to the next phase where you can just rip it for the rest of the transformations all the way up until RAM again. So I feel like it's been a very fun and positive experience, and I wonder what you guys think, man. Do y'all have a favorite form you like? I think in particular for me, I love the Ultimate form and the Lion form because it's just the easy amount of uptime for me. The ones that are low-key kind of scary, like Viper form, for example, has been the most tumultuous for my account for experiences is like, you know what, I can't take it lightly, or else he's gonna surprise you and just pack a mean wallop and something goes wrong, and next thing you know you're in trouble. And I honestly think that I could even improve that to a point where that's not even a problem either with the same suggestions I'm giving you guys. So there's gonna be more experimentation, there's gonna be more experiences down the road, and hopefully, you know, I think we're on pace to do pretty good for a number one position inside Chimera Clash. So hopefully we get some big results, some big rewards. Maybe we can start dibbling and dabbling into some content that's going to allow us to see, you know, what's it going to look like when we hit enough materials to start doing some forge crafting. I'm very excited to see what that brings to the table. Now, with that being said, let me know what you guys think about this experience. Are these tips good for you? Are these tips bad for you? If so, why? I'm actually very curious as to, you know, your opinion on the matter. And if there's any tips you want to give somebody else that may be trying to aspire to progress or do better in this particular mode, what is your thoughts, your perspective on the matter? Anyways, with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and as always remember, stay ascended.
Click together, yeah.